for 3 years now. I've been doing podcasts with Make Better Wealth Decisions. And it's been a real joy having guests on and asking them questions about decision making, about personal finance, how we all have blind spots, preparing for retirement, a number of things that are of great interest to a number of people. The people that help me produce my podcast have said to me that they think it would be useful if we could produce some things, some content where I did all the talking. So going forward, I'm going to be taking some opportunities to put out some podcasts where I don't have a guest. And I just offer my own thoughts about various things. Hopefully people can see that I actually have some product knowledge and some industry knowledge and have some wisdom to impart about decision making. But I think also it's better because when you can say things that you have on your mind, you don't have to worry so much about whether or not your guest agrees or whether or not you can allow the guest to go into more detail. You can actually go into as much detail as you want on whatever topic you want. So here we go. I think that doing more standalone projects will be of useful content for virtually everyone. But what I'm going to talk about today and what I talk about in all my podcasts, it's really critical that I say this. It's not intended as a forecast. I'll talk about the way things are going and what's going on. But my name is John. I don't read minds. I don't forecast the future. And so please, whatever I say, never ever take it as a forecast. Rather, think of it in terms of I'm going to be offering my thoughts in a professional capacity, and I'm going to be doing my own thing here on my own show. But I don't want Ciro to think that my regulator to think that I'm doing anything that constitutes an actual forecast. So whenever I say things, I'm going to try as much as possible to say not this will happen, but rather, what would you do if this happened? I'm trying to be Socratic. I'm trying to get you to think about what you do, think about meta thinking, where you're actually giving some thought to how you make decisions so that you can make better decisions by practicing better decision hygiene and thinking about things that you might otherwise overlook and focusing on why they're important or not, and allowing you to filter things for yourself so you can sort of see what it is that portfolio managers do on really a daily basis in terms of trying to help make decisions on behalf of their clients. So there are three things that I wanted to draw to your attention today that have different roots and different time frames, but I think they're all coming together. And I think it's a fascinating way of looking at the world if you look at all three of them concurrently, because I think they're all coming together in the summer of 2026. The first is a book that was released in 1972 called The Limits, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So that's the first bit of information that I want you to think about. The second is a paper that came out in late 2025 called AI 2027. That's the second thing. The third is the world that we're in today, August of 2026, the geopolitical constraints, the developments that we're going through, and how do they all fit in with the decisions that we have to make with regard to our portfolio. So let's walk through these things one at a time. So let's begin with the limits to growth. There are a number of limits that were enunciated in the book when it came out in 1972. It was extremely groundbreaking. And the idea here is that growth is not infinite, that there's only so much you can do in a finite earth. And that at some point, growth will be constrained by our growth capacity, by our resources, by our physical environment, by demographics, and so forth. And as a result, we have to prepare for a world where growth is no longer even possible. And as a result of that, we have to give some thought and consideration to whether or not growth should be even considered desirable in the longer term, because the more we grow, the sooner we bump up against those limits. So let's go through what those limits are and in very, very broad brushstrokes. They include, but are not limited to, things like the demographic cliff that we're going through right now, where a lot of people are getting older. There aren't as many young people. And that in turn has implications for what it means for our pension plans or our healthcare obligations and so forth. Similarly, we have problems with regard to sovereign debt and possible higher for longer rates because of inflationary pressure and because of debt levels being so high for virtually all nations across the developed world and indeed across the world in general. We have strains on water and on food and agricultural production. And similarly, we have strains on population growth. And we've been seeing population growth slowing down already for some time. Right now, we're at the point where women are only having about 1.3 or 1.4 births for a woman who is of childbearing age. That's not enough to maintain current population levels. Parts of the Western world are maintaining the population and their growth in their national economies by having immigrants come in, and there's a lot of pressure on that. But globally, sub-Saharan Africa is the only part of the world right now that is actually having women give birth to at a rate of more than 2.1 per woman. The whole rest of the world is below replacement rate. So that's a concern. Demographic trends, therefore, are dangerous up and by themselves. Both people getting older, people living longer, and fewer people coming in at the bottom of the pyramid to support them financially. And at some point, something is going to likely have to give. Fragmenting trade blocks. This is all that has been going on, especially in the past little while, what it does to supply chains for energy, for food, for industrial capacity, for any kinds of goods that we have. And then I think the one that everyone thinks of when they think of the limits to growth, which is climate. What is the impact on our climate? What are we doing with regard to the pricing of insurance? And what's happening to our farm and our ability to produce food? Because a lot of it is being taken up by climate change because of oceans rising and things being changed. So we've got a lot of things that have been going on. These were all enunciated in 1972 when the book came out. And the book actually had three scenarios. It had a base case scenario, then a best case, and a worst case. And now in 2026, people have gone back to the original book to see how things are going. And they have found that the base case, the mid-range option of the three that was released, or that was 56 years ago, is in fact very much in keeping with what we're experiencing right now. It's tracking almost exactly. So the limits to growth said somewhere in the 50 to 100 year time frame, we would be bumping up against those limits. And we're now at 56 years. And sure enough, it looks as though we're seeing a lot of the problems that were foretold, the forest fires, various things like that, food shortages, and it's all becoming very real. And it's the sort of thing where in 1972, the book was seen as being something that is radical and almost fantastical, maybe something out of science fiction. Now it's becoming very real. It's very tangible. People are starting to see that there was a lot of the things that were being talked about in the book are in fact what we are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And it suddenly becomes something that we need to think about. And I wonder about how many people listening have actually thought about these things. So let's go into the second thing, a paper AI 2027. And some of the predictions for AI that are made in that paper are really remarkable because of the way they are juxtaposed with the limits to growth paper. They predicted that the impact of superhuman AI over the course of the next day will be enormous, and that in fact would actually exceed the impact of the Industrial Revolution. So it would be difficult to overstate how massive the AI revolution could very well be. Sam Altman has said that OpenAI is setting its sights on superintelligence in the true sense of the word, and that he believes that we are in for a glorious future. That's wonderful. That's utopian almost. It's also the sort of thing that is possibly found in a science fiction book. Of course, there are two sides to that coin, and we'll get into that in a minute. But here's a quote that we have from the people who wrote the paper. It was a team that was led by a guy named Daniel Kokataijo. And it should be mentioned that Daniel's got an excellent track record in forecasting. So once again, even though the paper is only 8 or 9 or 10 months old, it's already been remarkably accurate in terms of what's been going on. And again, when people make reasonably accurate forecasts, I'm not making a forecast. I'm just pointing out that other forecasters have made them, that they have seemed to have been accurate up until now, and I'm asking what people have thought about them. So here's what Daniel says. He says, we won't be right about everything, but much of this is guesswork. But over the course of the project, we did do an immense amount of background research, and trend extrapolation to make the most informed guesses we could. And of course, once again, I will stress that given that that was the way they tried very hard to make reasonable inputs, garbage in, garbage out, they tried to be as reasonable as possible with regard to what's going on. And so far, they've been fairly accurate. So, what did they really predict? They said there would be a race of the major AI companies in Silicon Valley to try to get to superintelligence. But the problem, of course, is that the incentives are misaligned, and you want to be able to maximize your share price and maximize your control of the way people think and how people think by getting people to use your AI. But of course, the problem is that AI left unconstrained could very well run amok. It could start becoming sentient and allowing itself to actually make decisions that might not be in the best interest of the humans who actually did the original programming in the first place. And there's a real concern that it could destroy the human race or perhaps enslave the human race. So left unchecked, there's a real problem. So one of the things that Daniel Kokatajo says is that maybe we should put in some constraints to keep it from going too far too quickly. But the problem, as he notes, is that even if you get everyone in Silicon Valley to do that, you're also racing against the Chinese who are also developing their own AI. And so now you've got a situation where the AI CEOs in Silicon Valley are racing against each other, somewhat suspiciously, thinking that, oh, this guy wants to have the best AI because the ruler of the world is the person who has the best AI. And that could only be a year or two away. So there's a sort of an idea of we have to get there first so that it's our AI because I'm a virtuous person and I'm not going to do anything nefarious. But that other CEO down the road, I'm not so sure about him. So I want to get there first. The problem, of course, is that in order to get there first, you have to remove the constraints, and removing the constraints allows the genie to get out of the bottle, so to speak, and allows AI to do even more harm than the good it could do if everything worked out beautifully. Now, the utopian future they talk about is it would be wonderful. Yeah, sure. And in the matter of a few years, AI will take most jobs, not just white collar jobs, but virtually all the jobs. We'll have robots that can do virtually everything. And the people who write the report say there's an opportunity for this to be absolutely wonderful, for everything to be for us to reach super intelligence. So we make major breakthroughs with regard to science and technology and medicine, and therefore longevity, which ironically would exacerbate one of the problems we talked about earlier. But at any rate, the abundance would be so massive that people wouldn't worry. We would all be wealthy and we would be able to live lives of leisure, and work would become voluntary if you wanted to, but most people would just sit back and enjoy the fruits of a world where things have gone very, very well. And we'll see how that goes. Now, I cannot help but note that there's a very obvious disconnect in terms of these two races. The 1972 has been a slow plodding sort of a tortoise, if you will, in terms of what's been going on, and part of why the world has not necessarily taken notice and shown real concern is because the change has been incremental, and as a result, it's not in your face. AI, in contrast, has been revolutionary already just in the past couple of years, and it's accelerating, and it's becoming new versions are released very, very quickly. And now we have old AI that is used to train the new AI to become better, more inquisitive, fewer hallucinations, fewer problems, more detail, more granularity, and a whole bunch of different things. Obviously, problems like deep fakes and that sort of thing are also coming along. But the real problem here is one of the energy that's being consumed in order to generate all this AI. The voracious appetite for energy is truly mind-boggling. And once again, in a world where resources are limited, now we have a situation where you've got two things. You've got the slow plodding depletion of resources, which are finite, and then this active, voracious demand for an insatiable amount of energy. But if we could just get there first before we run out, then maybe we can actually have the super intelligence. And if we can use it and harness it for good, maybe we can have a wonderful future. And it seems as though we're going to be at the tipping point where we will find out one way or the other, probably, again, not a forecast, but likely it seems, I don't know, but judging what the experts are saying, before the end of 2027. We're only a year and a half or so away from finding out which outcome we're going to be dealing with. So now we get to the third. And this is the one where I think there's a real wild card because it can throw a spanner in the works. And that is what's been going on with regard to geopolitical events. I have my wife has family from Ukraine, and a lot of people aren't really aware of this, but the war in Ukraine actually started in 2014 with Vladimir Putin invading Crimea. A lot of people think the war started in February of 2022, but in fact, that was just a continuation of something that Putin had started almost 8 years earlier. That war has been going on, and it has been a bit of a proxy war with the Russians fighting NATO allies that are giving the Ukrainians resources to keep the fight going. And of course, we've learned a lot about drone warfare and the use of AI to talk about the warfare of the current age. Very, very different from what people thought warfare would be like short years ago. And we're seeing how cheap drones that cost maybe tens of thousands of dollars can be used as a counteroffensive to multi-million-dollar missiles that are maybe a generation or two older and cost so much more, exponentially more. And as you can win a war just by having your weapons go up against someone else's weapons because your weapons cost about 1% of what their weapons cost. So if we go 1-to-1, then obviously the countries that are deploying the more expensive weapons, I'm looking at you, United States, are going to be in a financial hole in short order. And indeed, the U.S. is now approaching $40 trillion of accumulated national debt. That is something which is truly astronomical. So we've got the war in Ukraine, which started in 2014 and has been going on now for over a decade. In addition, we have tariffs that started with the Trump administration shortly after taking office again in 2025. And in the spring of 2025, we had tariffs going all around the world, and that accelerated the trend of something called deglobalization. So we've been deglobalizing at a very rapid rate over the past year and a quarter as a result of Donald Trump's tariffs, which he has shown he is going to apply. Even if they're illegal, he'll just find new ways and new things that he can do and wait for the courts to strike them down. But at the time, he will apply paid on other countries because he sees tariffs as being, he sees the global framework of the entire world as being a zero-sum game, a win-lose game. So part of why we did so well and expanded and we're so very prosperous over the past two generations is because of globalization creating a win-win scenario where people could do, countries could do whatever they were best at and produce things as cheaply as possible and import them. And that could drive down cost prices and your purchasing power would be improved. And everyone's lot in life, both in the Western world and in the developing world, was improving and everyone was very happy. Well, now those supply chains are being broken down and everyone is having to reshore or friendshore, as they say, as a result of what has been going on with deglobalization. And that in turn has caused inflation and has made the world a lot more precarious. And a lot of people are now worried about how resilient their economy will be at home as a result of these tides that are roughing up against their shores. Now we think about what happened with Iran. Now we're going to get it right to the current time. The Americans bombed Iran originally in June of 2025, saying that they had removed their nuclear capacity for at least a decade. And lo and behold, that wasn't good enough because in February of 2026, they went back and said that they needed to finish the job and they were going to do even more to not only remove the nuclear capacities of the Iranians, but also to hopefully engage in some degree of regime change and to take out the current leadership to get the citizens to revolt against their own government and to see if we could bring about a new world order. They were obviously being egged on by Israel, which was a nation that had its own agenda, that was doing its own bit of fighting with the Palestinians. So now we start thinking about how you've been in a world where the United States and Israel have been at war with Iran for a little over a half a year, and we've had a large number of threats followed by a large number of pullbacks. And what do we think about this? Well, I think it's safe to say that at this point, the whole world knows that Donald Trump has a credibility problem. He has tried to gain confidence by coercing his opponents, and that doesn't always work when you're dealing with fundamentalist regimes, just those in Iran. So the word that people have been using now to describe what Donald Trump does is taco. They say that Trump always chickens out. So let's go the series of events of what has been going on in the war with Iran since it started. So it started in February, and in March we had our first taco. Donald Trump gave a 48-hour deadline for the Iranians to surrender, and they didn't. And he tacoed. Then in April, we had the threat to blast the Iranians into the Stone Age if they didn't open the Strait of Hormuz. And of course, the Iranians didn't open the Strait of Hormuz, and that led not to the being into the Stone Age, but rather to a ceasefire. And Trump said, okay, well, maybe we can talk some more. So that was in April. Then you go through May and into June. Come June, once again, Trump was being belligerent and he called for the strike of Iran as he had done previously. And then he tacoed. In July, we had to hold off on a probable deal, and Trump then tacoed. And this is something where you have to think about the memorandum of understanding, where there was a deal. It was extremely favorable to the Iranians, and Trump, being Trump, found a way to go back on 3 of the 14 clauses in the actual memorandum of understanding, articles in the memorandum of understanding, which caused the Iranians to say, you know what, we're really not going to trust you. So just this past week, on August 2nd, Trump said that he was locked and loaded and ready to hit the Iranians harder than they'd ever been hit before. And then, of course, what did he do? He tacoed. He halted the attacks a day later and said, we're going to go back to the drawing board and see if we can negotiate a peace. Now, the thing that has been happening, and there are a number of experts who have been saying this, notably Robert Pape at the University of Chicago, that every time there is an escalation and a taco, Iran gains more cards. And every time Trump threatens, Iran waits. And then the escalation of the war and the escalation of the stakes is heightened. We're at the point now where global supplies of oil are down to 2 or 3 weeks. And we're now coming up to the end of the first week of August. And it seems as though it is nearly certain that if the Strait of Hormuz is not opened, whether the U.S. is sending troops on the ground or not, or trying to use more air power to try to get the Iranians to submit or not, if the Iranians do not allow oil to flow freely through the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz in the next few days, it seems virtually certain that we will be in a global recession. Now, again, that's not a forecast. I'm not saying I'm forecasting it, but there are lots of other people who are experts who are making that forecast. And I am saying, I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm asking you, have you thought about what might happen? Have you thought about what you might do? This is a situation where the world is changing, and it's changing very rapidly in real time based on a series of different things that are playing out in different time horizons, but they're all converging basically on the month of August of 2026. And now is the time when you have to make better wealth decisions. What are you going to do to make sure that you've thought about how all of these things will affect you? And what have you done to make adjustments to your portfolio to make sure you are as safe as you can be? Now, again, there's no way of knowing for sure. And I think it's worth repeating that the best way to deal with any kind of uncertainty is to diversify. If you have a large number of assets in a number of different asset classes with different risk profiles and different amounts of liquidity and different characteristics depending on how things play out, you are less likely to be caught looking the other way if you're your eggs in one basket and then having something happen to that basket. So I'm going to end now by saying that this is something that is extremely important for everyone to think about. How is the world changing? What will I do to make sure that I am ready for those changes should they come about? And what will I do in the meantime as I wait for them to come about? I want to thank you for tuning in today. And if you, I don't do this often enough, please, if you enjoy the content, like, subscribe. We really are trying to grow the channel, and we really are doing what we can to bring content to the people that listen to actually make better wealth decisions. And that's exactly what you're doing.
If you're worried about the current investment climate and your money, go to my website to book a call for personalized advice to assist you in feeling secure and protected about your retirement.